Hey everyone, Razzbowski here, and the Five Nights at Freddy's novel, The Silver Eyes, has just dropped. She went out the back door to the driveway and stopped in front of the garage that had become her father's workshop. Half buried in the gravel a few feet away was a piece of metal, and Charlie went to pick it up. It was jointed in the middle, and she held it in her hands, smiling a little as she bent it back and forth. An elbow joint, she thought. I wonder who that was going to belong to. She had stood in this exact spot many times. She closed her eyes. The memory overwhelmed her. She was a little girl again, sitting on the floor of her father's workshop, playing with the scraps of wood and metal as though they were toy blocks, trying to build a tower with the uneven pieces. The shop was hot and she was sweaty, grime sticking to her legs as she sat in her shorts and sneakers. She could almost smell the sharp, metallic odour of the soldering iron. Her father was nearby, never out of sight, working on Stanley the unicorn. Stanley's face was still unfinished. On one side, white and shining and friendly, with a shiny brown eye that seemed almost to see. The other half of the toy's face was all exposed, circuit boards and metal parts. Charlie's father looked at her and smiled. She smiled back, beloved. Behind her father, in a darkened corner, barely visible, hung a jumble of metal limbs, a twisted skeleton with burning silver eyes. Every once in a while it gave an uncanny twitch. Charlie never looked at it, but as her father worked, she played with her makeshift toys, while her eye was drawn back to it again and again. The limbs contorted, seemed almost mocking, the thing a ghastly jester, and yet there was something about it that suggested enormous pain. "Daddy," Charlie said, and her father did not look up from his work. "Daddy?" she said again, or more urgently, and this time he slowly turned towards her, as though not fully present in the world. "What do you need, sweetie?" And she pointed at the metal skeleton. "Does it hurt?" She wanted to ask the question, but looking into her father's eyes, she found that she could not. She shook her head. "Nothing." He nodded at her with an absent smile and went back to work. Behind him, the creature gave another awful twitch, and its eyes burned. Charlie shivered and drew back to the present. She glanced behind her, feeling exposed. She looked down, and her gaze fixed on something. 3 widely spaced grooves in the ground. She knelt, thoughtful, ran her finger over one of them. The gravel was scattered away, the marks worn heavily in the dirt. A camera tripod of some sort? It was the first unfamiliar thing I'd seen. The door to the workshop was cracked open slightly, inviting, but she felt no desire to go inside. Quickly, she headed back to her car. Settling into the driver's seat, she stopped. Her keys were gone, having probably fallen out of her pocket somewhere inside the house. She retraced her steps, only glancing into the living room and kitchen before heading up to her bedroom. The keys were on the wicker chair beside Theodore the bear. She picked them up and jangled them for a moment, not quite ready to leave the room behind. She sat down on the bed. Stanley the unicorn had come back around the bed before stopping, as he always did, and as she sat, she patted him absently on the head. It had grown dark while she was outside, and the room was now cast in shadows. Somehow, without the bright sunlight, the toys' flaws, their deterioration, were thrown into sharp relief. Theodore's eyes were no longer shone, and his thin fur hanging ear made him look sickly vagabond. When she looked down at Stanley, the rust around his eyes made them look like hollow sockets, and his bared teeth, which she had always thought was a smile, became the awful, knowing grin of a skull. Charlie stood up. Careful not to touch him, she hurried towards the door, but she tripped on the tracks and fell sprawling on the floor, her foot catching on the wheel beside the bed as it went. There was a whir of spinning metal, and as she raised her head, a small pair of feet appeared under her nose, clad in shining patent leather. She stood up. There above her was Ella, staring down at her silent and uninvited, her glassy eyes almost appearing to see. The teacup and saucer were held out before her with military stiffness, and Charlie got up cautiously, taking care not to disturb the doll. She went out of the room, stepping carefully to avoid accidentally activating any other toys, and as she went, Ella almost matched her pace, retreating to her closet. Charlie hurried down the stairs, seized by an urgency to get away. In the car, she fumbled the keys 3 times before sliding it into place. She backed too fast down the driveway, running recklessly over the grass of the front yard, and sped away. After about a mile, Charlie pulled over on the shoulder and turned the car off. Staring straight ahead through the windshield, her eyes focused on nothing. She forced herself to breathe slowly. She reached up and adjusted the rearview mirror so she could see herself. She always expected to see pain, anger, sorrow written on her face, but they never were. Her cheeks were pink and her round face looked almost cheerful, like always. Her first weeks living with Aunt Jen, being introduced to Jen's friends, she heard the same thing over and over. What a pretty child. What a happy-looking child she is. Charlie always looked like she was about to smile, her brown eyes wide and sparkling, her thin chin ready to curve up, even when she wanted to sob. The incongruity of a mild betrayal. She ran her fingers through the light brown hair, as though that would magically fix its slight frizziness, and put the mirror back into position. She turned the car back on and searched for the radio station, hoping music might bring her fully back to reality. She flipped from one station to another, not really hearing what any of them were playing, and finally settled on an AM broadcast with a host who seemed to be yelling incandescently at his audience. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the brash and annoying sound was enough to jar her back to the present. The clock in the car was always wrong, but she checked her watch. It was almost time to meet her friends at the diner they had chosen near the centre of town. Charlie pulled back onto the road and drove, letting the sound of the angry talk radio host soothe her mind. When she reached the restaurant, Charlie pulled up into the lot and stopped, but did not park. The front of the diner had a long picture window across it, and she could see right inside. Though she had not seen them for years, it took her only a moment to spot her friends through the window. Jessica was easiest to pick out from the crowd. She always enclosed pictures with her letters, and right now she looked exactly like her last photo. Even seated, she was clearly taller than either of the boys and very thin. Though Charlie could not see her whole outfit, she was wearing a loose white t-shirt with an embroidered vest and had a brimmed hat perched on her head, glossy, shoulder-length brown hair, an enormous flower threatening to tip it off her head. She was talking, gesturing excitedly about something as she spoke. The two boys were sitting next to each other facing her. Carlton looked like an older version of his red-headed childhood self. He still had a bit of a baby face, but his features had refined, and his hair was carefully toused and held in place by some alchemical hair product. He was almost pretty for a boy, and wore a black workout shirt, though she doubted he'd ever worked out a day in his life. He was slouched forward on the table, resting his chin in his hands. Beside him was John, sitting closest to the window. John had been the kind of child who got dirty even before he went outside. There would be paint on his shirt before the teacher handed out the watercolours, grass stains on his knees before they came near the playground, and dirt under his fingernails just after he washed his hands. Charlie knew it was him, because it had to be, because he looked completely different. The grubbiness of his childhood had been replaced by something crisp and clean. He was wearing a neatly pressed light green button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up and the collar open, preventing him from looking too uptight, and he was leaned back confidently in the booth, nodding enthusiastically, apparently absorbed in whatever Jessica was saying. The only confession to his former self was his hair, sticking up all over his head, and he had a 5 o'clock shadow, a smug adult version of the dirt he was always covered in as a child. Charlie smiled to herself. John had been something like her childhood crush before either of them really understood what that meant. He gave her cookies from his Transformers lunchbox and once in kindergarten took the blame when she broke a glass jar that held coloured beads for arts and craft. She remembered that moment when it slipped from her hands and she watched it fall. She could not have moved fast enough to catch it, but she would not have tried. She wanted to see it break. The glass hit the wood floor and shat into 1,000 pieces. The glass hit the wood floor and shattered into 1,000 pieces, and the beads scattered, many-coloured among the shards, and she thought it was beautiful. And then she started to cry. John had a note sent home to his parents, and when she told him thank you, he had winked at her with an irony beyond his years and simply said, "For what?" After that, John was allowed to come to her room. She let him play with Stanley and Theodore, watching anxiously the first time as he learned to press the buttons and make them move. She would be crushed if he didn't like them, knowing instinctively that if he did not, she would think less of him. They were her family, but John was fascinated as soon as he saw them. He loved her mechanical toys, and so she loved him. 2 years later, behind a tree beside her father's workshop, she almost let him kiss her. And then it happened, and everything ended, at least for Charlie. Charlie shook herself, forcing her mind back to the present. Looking again at Jessica's polished appearance, she looked down at herself. Purple t-shirt, denim jacket, black jeans, and combat boots. It had felt like a good choice this morning, but now she wished she had chosen something else. This is all you ever wear, she reminded herself. She found a parking space and locked the car behind her. Even though people in Hurricane, Utah did not usually lock their cars, and went into the diner to meet her friends for the first time in 10 years. The warmth and noise and light of the restaurant hit her in a wave as she entered, and for a moment she was overwhelmed. But Jessica saw her pause in the doorway and shouted her name, and Charlie smiled and went over. "Hi," she said awkwardly, flicking her eyes at each of them but not fully making eye contact. Jessica scooted over on the red vinyl bench and patted the seat beside her. "Here, sit," she said. "I was just telling John and Carlton about my glamorous life." She rolled her eyes as she said it, managing to convey both self-deprecation and the sense that her life was truly something exciting. "Did you know Jessica lives in New York?" Carlton said. There was something careful about the way he spoke, like he was thinking about his words before he formed them. John was silent, but he smiled at Charlie anxiously. Jessica rolled her eyes again with a flash of déjà vu. Charlie suddenly recalled that this had been a habit even when they were children. 8 million people live in New York, Carlton. It's not exactly an achievement, Jessica said. Carlton shrugged. "I've never been there anyway," he said. "I didn't know you still lived in town," Charlie said. "Where else am I going to live?" Carlton said. "My family's been here since 1896, he said, deepening his voice to mimic his father. "Is that even true?" Charlie asked. "I don't know," Carlton said in his own register. "Could be. Dad ran for mayor 2 years ago. I mean, he lost, but still, who runs for mayor?" He made a face. "I swear the day I turn 18, I am out of here." "Where are you going to go?" John said, looking seriously at Carlton. Carlton met his eyes just as serious for a moment. Abruptly, he broke away and pointed out the window, closing one eye as if to aim true. John raised an eyebrow, then looked out the window, trying to follow the line Carlton was pointing to. Carlton looked too. Carlton wasn't pointing at anything. John opened his mouth to say something, and Carlton interrupted. "Or," he said, and smoothly pointed in the opposite direction. "Okay," John scratched his head, looking slightly embarrassed. "Anywhere, right?" he added with a laugh. "Where's everyone else?" Charlie said, peering out the window and searching parking lot for new arrivals. "Tomorrow," John said, and Jessica jumped in to clarify. "They're coming tomorrow morning. Marla's bringing her little brother. Can you believe it?" "Jason?" Charlie smiled. She remembered Jason as a little bundle of blankets with a tiny red face peeking out. "I mean, who wants a baby around?" Jessica adjusted her hat primly. "I'm pretty sure he's not a baby anymore," Charlie said, stifling a laugh. "Practically a baby," Jessica said. "Anyway, I booked us a room at the motel down by the highway. It was all I could find. The boys are staying with Carlton." "Okay," Charlie said. She was vaguely impressed by Jessica's organisation, but not happy about the plan. She was loath to share a room with Jessica, who now seemed like a stranger. Jessica had become the kind of girl who intimidated her, polished and immaculate, speaking as though she had everything in life figured out. For a moment, Charlie considered going back to her old house for the night, but as soon as she thought of it, the idea repelled her. That house, at night, was no longer the province of a living. Don't be dramatic, she scolded herself, but now John was speaking. He had a way of commanding attention with his voice, probably because he spoke less often than everyone else. He spent most of his time listening, but not out of reticence. He was gathering information, speaking only when he had wisdom, sarcasm to dispense. Often, it was both at once. Does anyone know what's happening tomorrow? They were all silent for a moment, and the waitress took the opportunity to come over for their order. Charlie flipped quickly through the menu, her eyes not really focusing on the words. Charlie's turn to order came much faster than she was expecting, and she froze. Eggs? She said at last. The woman's hard expression was still fixed on her, and she realised that she had not finished. Scrambled wheat toast, she added, and the woman went away. Charlie looked back down at the menu. She hated this about herself. When she was caught off guard, she seemed to lose the ability to act, to process what was going on around her. People were incomprehensible, their demands alien. Ordering dinner shouldn't be hard, she thought. The others had begun their conversation again, and she turned her attention to them, feeling like she had fallen behind again. What do we even say to his parents? Jessica was saying. Carlton, do you ever see them? Charlie asked. Not really, he said. Around, I guess, sometimes. I'm surprised they stayed in Hurricane, Jessica said with a note of worldly disapproval in her voice. Charlie said nothing, but thought, how could they not? His body was never found. How could they not have secretly hoped he might come home, no matter how impossible they knew it was? How could they leave the only home Michael knew? It would mean really, finally giving up on him. Maybe that was his scholarship. Maybe that was this scholarship was an admission that he was never coming home. Charlie was acutely aware that they were in a public place, and talking about Michael felt inappropriate. They were, in a sense, both insiders and outsiders. They had been closer to Michael, probably, than anyone in this restaurant. Yet, with the exception of Carlton, they were no longer from Hurricane. They did not belong. She saw it before she felt it, tears falling on her paper placemat, and she hurriedly wiped her eyes, looking around, hoping no one had noticed. When she looked up, John appeared to be studying his silverware, but she knew he had seen, and was grateful to him for not offering to comfort. John, do you still write? Charlie asked. John had declared himself an author when he was about 6, having learned to read and write when he was 4, a year ahead of most of them. At the age of 7, he completed his first novel, and pressed his poorly spelled, inscrutably illustrated creation on his friends and family, demanding reviews. Charlie remembered she had given him only 2 stars. John laughed at the question. I actually do my E's the right way around these days, he said. I cannot believe you remember that, but I actually do, yeah. He stopped, clearly wanting to say more. What do you write? Carlton obliged with the question. John looked down at his placemat, speaking mostly to the table. Short stories, mostly. I actually had one published last year. I mean, it was just a magazine, nothing big. They all made suitable noises of being impressed, and he looked up again, embarrassed but pleased. What was the story about? Charlie said, and he hesitated. Before John could speak or decide not to speak, the waitress returned with their food. They had all ordered from the breakfast menu coffee, eggs and bacon, blueberry pancakes for Carlton. The brightly coloured food looked hopeful, like a fresh start to the day. Charlie took a bite of her toast, and they all ate silently for a moment. Hey Carlton, John said suddenly, whatever happened to Freddy's anyway? There was a brief hush. Carlton looked nervously at Charlie, and Jessica stared up at the ceiling. John flushed red, and Charlie spoke hastily. It's okay, Carlton. I'd like to know too. Carlton shrugged, stabbing at his pancakes nervously with his fork. They built over it, he said. What did they build? Jessica said. Is there something there now? Was it built over or just torn down? John asked, and Carlton shrugged, quick like a nervous tick. Like I said, I don't know. It's too far back from the road to see, and I haven't exactly investigated. It might have been leased to someone, but I don't know what they did. It's all been blocked off for years and under construction. You can't even tell if the building is still there. So it could still be there, Jessica said with a spark of excitement breaking through her. Like I said, I don't know, Carlton said. Charlie felt the diner's fluorescent lights glaring down on her face, suddenly too bright. She felt exposed. She had barely eaten, but she found herself rising from the booth, pulling a few crumpled bills from her pocket and dropping them on the table. I'm gonna go outside for a minute, she said. Smoke break, she added hastily. You don't smoke. She chided herself for the clumsy line. She made her way to the door, jostling past a family of 4 without saying excuse me, and stepped into the cool